leaving the supermarket with bags full of groceries, Anne hurried home to prepare a festive dinner for her 40th birthday. Only close friends and their families were invited. Lost in thought, she stepped off the sidewalk into the parking lot and was abruptly knocked off her feet by a sharp push from behind. She fell, dropping the bags and scattering their contents, and screamed in surprise and pain. "Excuse me, lady, for God's sake, I don't know how it happened. Where did you come from?" The frightened driver rushed to help Anne to her feet, clearly upset about the incident. "You almost ran over me. Who even gives such people a driver's license?" Anne exclaimed, rubbing her injured hand. "Well, you're at fault too. You should have looked around," the stranger protested. Anne shot him a fiery look, and the man quickly lowered his tone. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. Let me take you home, I'll gather the groceries." As the man picked up the bags and started collecting the scattered items, Anne, coming to her senses, realized she was partly to blame. She softened her tone a little. "You're right. I was lost in thought. If you could give me a ride home, I would be very grateful." "My name is Matthew," the man said, smiling and extending his hand. "Anne," she replied, also smiling. On the way home, Anne and Matthew had an easy conversation. "Your husband is lucky to have such a beautiful, smart wife. Unfortunately, I wasn't so lucky. My wife left me with a little daughter. That's how we live. Do you have children?" Anne's expression changed at the question. The topic of children was a sore spot for her. Though she had been married for a long time, she never managed to become a mother. She wasn't about to discuss this with a stranger, so she replied briefly, "No, we don't have children. We've arrived. Thank you for the ride. Have a nice day." The car stopped at a high gate behind which was a large, beautiful house. "Anne, I'm sorry if I offended you," Matthew said, noticing he had upset his new acquaintance but not understanding why. "No, forgive me. My nerves have been frayed lately. Thank you again," Anne said. Once inside, Anne quickly unpacked the groceries and began preparing dinner. When the table in the living room was set, and there was little time left before the guests arrived, Anne called her husband, but he didn't answer. She sighed heavily. Lately, her husband had been staying late at work. He often got irritated with Anne's questions and blamed a critical project. In time, Anne had grown accustomed to her husband's absence and learned to live with it. The doorbell rang. On the intercom screen, Anne saw Gwen and Wes smiling. They had been friends since college and were probably the only friends of Anne and her husband. Christopher preferred not to let new people into their lives, except for old friends. "Anne, you look like you're forever 25. Gwen said admiringly. "You are wonderful." "Happy birthday, dear." Wes handed Anne a beautiful bouquet. "And where's our hard-working friend? Is he not here yet?" "Well, you know, it's always urgent projects, meetings, and business for Christopher," Anne replied. "I don't understand how you endure such a life. You're always alone. Maybe you should go back to work. Wes is looking for a new specialist, and finding a good architect is as hard as finding a surgeon. I remember you were the best in the course," Gwen suggested, sensing the oppressive atmosphere in her friend's home. "I would be happy to, but you know that Christopher is against it," Anne said. "Forgive me, Anne, but I have to say it. Christopher is selfish, and you are being foolish. Don't you see he's turned you into a housekeeper while he does as he pleases? It's so convenient for him," Gwen expressed her opinion. "My dears, I'm glad to see you. Please come to the table. As for Christopher, I hope he can join us soon." Anne tried to smooth things over, leading the guests to the festive table. After some time, when everyone had eaten and were reminiscing about their student years, Christopher finally came home. He was serious and smiled at the guests more out of politeness than joy. "Christopher, you could have come earlier. We haven't seen each other for so long, and it's your wife's birthday. Where are the flowers for the hostess and your beloved woman?" Gwen couldn't remain silent. When she saw Christopher walk into the room empty-handed, Anne forced a smile. "I'm glad to see you," she said, "but work doesn't wait." "Wes probably understands," Christopher replied, making it clear he didn't appreciate such comments. "I didn't have time to buy flowers. I was rushing, as you see. Anne, happy birthday." He handed her a box. Anne opened it and smiled sadly. Christopher never put much thought into her gifts, always giving her jewelry, and this year was no exception. The table became livelier with Christopher's arrival, but his constant attention to his phone interrupted the conversations. At the end of the evening, after saying goodbye to their friends, silence fell over the house once again. Anne began to clean up while Christopher remained engrossed in his phone. When she finished, she turned to him. "Christopher, don't you think that even when you're home, you're very far away in your thoughts?" "Don't nitpick. I'm working," he snapped. "Okay, I understand," Anne replied quietly, walking to the bedroom. Barely holding back tears, she entered the room and allowed herself to cry. Despite being married, Anne felt very lonely and unwanted. Her father had passed away when she was young, and her relationship with her stepfather had never been close. Thankfully, Anne's friends remained in her life. Otherwise, she would have been completely alone. She remembered her conversation with Gwen and Wes and seriously considered the need to start working. It would help her spend her time productively and not feel so lonely. The next morning, Anne woke up early and noticed that Christopher wasn't next to her. She had a bad feeling. Peeking into her husband's slightly open study door, she saw Christopher sleeping on the couch, using his jacket as a blanket. Her heart raced. After taking a shower and getting ready, Anne went downstairs to the living room. Christopher was sitting in a chair, staring thoughtfully out the window with a cup of coffee in his hands. He didn't notice her presence at first, and when Anne greeted him, Christopher jumped in surprise. "You've been acting strange lately. Are you okay? You slept in the office. Are you avoiding me? Is there a problem at work? What's going on?" Anne asked, voicing all her concerns. "We need to talk," Christopher replied in a calm voice. "Yes, I wanted to talk to you as well. I know you'll be against it, but I've decided to start working," Anne said. "I've fallen in love with another woman. She's pregnant and we're expecting a child," Christopher answered in the same mundane tone. Anne's vision blurred. She swayed and could barely stand. "How long has your affair been going on?" was all she could ask. "What does it matter? I found out about the pregnancy yesterday. If it's so important to you," Christopher said. "Thank you for not ruining my birthday," Anne whispered as tears streamed down her face. "Let's do without hysterics," Christopher said. "Don't you care about my feelings at all?" Anne asked. "And what about mine? I'm 40 years old, and all my acquaintances have children. What do we have?" Christopher raised his voice, unaffected by his wife's tears. "How dare you blame me for not having children? You know how much I've been through, how many doctors I've seen," Anne cried. "Stop this spectacle. Thousands of people get divorced and move on. I will soon have a son and finally be happy. Tonight, when I come back, we will discuss the details of the divorce," Christopher said and left, slamming the door behind him. Anne collapsed on the floor, crying from pain and humiliation. Christopher decided the first thing he would do was to stop by his mistress Ellen's place and let her know he had finally confessed everything to his wife and that they would soon get divorced. He planned to legalize his new relationship. Using his key, Christopher opened the door to the apartment he rented for Ellen, surprised to find her packing a huge suitcase. "I'm home. Why isn't anyone greeting me? What's going on here? Are we going somewhere?" he asked with a smile. Ellen, surprised to see Christopher, replied, "Ah, hi darling. I didn't expect you so early." "So, are we going somewhere?" Christopher asked, twirling Ellen in his arms. The young woman pouted theatrically, and Christopher looked at her questioningly. "Yes, we're going to your beautiful country house where your wife is currently enjoying life," Ellen said. "Well, dear, she has nowhere else to go for now. I have to buy her an apartment. I can't just throw her out onto the street," Christopher explained, frowning. But Ellen wasn't listening. "I don't want to understand anything. We're a family, there are almost 3 of us, and we're huddled in this tiny apartment while she lives alone in that big house. Our baby needs fresh air, and we're forced to live in the city and breathe this polluted air," Ellen said, almost in tears, gently stroking her stomach. "You're probably right. Don't be upset. Don't upset our son. We'll move," Christopher said. Meanwhile, Anne was in shock over her husband's betrayal. She sat on the couch for half the day, thinking it was just a cruel, silly joke. Christopher will come home and say it was all a prank, she repeated to herself like a spell. An incoming call on her mobile phone made her tremble. She didn't want to talk to anyone, but wiping away her tears, she looked at the phone screen. Her heart pounded wildly. Christopher was calling. Flicking her finger up the screen, she answered, but the knot in her throat prevented her from speaking. "Are you there? Okay, you don't have to say anything. Listen, I found you an apartment. You need to take a look at it," Christopher said. Anne didn't bother to listen to her husband's speech and simply hung up. She believed such issues should be discussed face to face, not over the phone. Brewing herself a cup of herbal tea, she settled on the cozy terrace of her home. She loved this house very much. They had bought it together when they were very young, invested their souls into it, and gradually built their lives together. Now Christopher, as if nothing had happened, as if all those years together had never happened, said he found her an apartment. "Scoundrel," Anne hissed aloud, wiping away her tears. She tried to pull herself together, but the happy moments of their married life that surfaced in her memory wouldn't let her rest. The woman was in a broken state, seriously considering whether she should continue living with emptiness and loneliness ahead. Unnoticed by Anne, evening arrived. She was still lost in thought and didn't even notice when her husband returned home. Christopher found his wife and immediately got down to serious talk. "Anne, what was that? You hung up the phone and didn't answer my calls. We are adults, after all. Let's part peacefully and amicably. I'm not holding you back." "What do you mean? What don't you understand? I'm not holding you back. Go to your mistress if you want. I found you an apartment. Then go there. I'm in my own home, and I'm not going to vacate it for your mistress. In the worst case, we'll sell it and divide the money. I think that would be fair. Anne, this is actually a house bought under my mother's name, if you remember. Moreover, it cannot be sold as it is under mortgage." "Excellent. Now I understand why you insisted on registering the house in your mother's name. You covered your back very well. Do you remember that I sold my apartment years ago and invested everything I had in this house?" "I remember everything. That's why I'm telling you that I found you an apartment. You need to see it, and then we can finalize the deal and also the divorce." "Fine, live here, but remember you have to answer for everything in this life. For everything, and you will definitely answer for the pain you caused me." The next day, Anne went to see the apartment her spouse had found for her. Along the way, she remembered how happy she and Christopher had been, how much they had gone through together to achieve what they wanted, what it had cost to arrange their home, and how strongly she had supported her husband. Anne had sacrificed her own career for her spouse, helping him with complex projects. Now, she couldn't understand how Christopher could so easily replace her. Anne knew that the main reason for the divorce was the lack of children. This topic was very painful. How many times had she visited the best doctor's offices? How many pills had she taken? How many injections had she endured? But all in vain. Doctors had just shrugged, unable to explain why, after so many years together, she and her husband had no children. Christopher never blamed his wife directly for this problem, but he was sure it was her fault. It pained Anne deeply to hear Christopher talk about Gwen and Wes and their growing son. Lost in thought, she didn't notice that she was standing right in front of the entrance to her new home. The apartment, located on the 5th floor, was quite spacious and bright. It couldn't compare to a private house, but it was suitable for comfortable living. "Where I started once, I end now," muttered Anne. The next day, her suitcases were almost packed. She took only what was hers and sadly looked back at her home. Alas, she never found true happiness there. "Christopher, what is she doing here?" a woman cried out behind her. Anne turned around to see a young girl standing in front of her. She was about 20 years younger than Anne, beautiful and confident, and could have easily been Christopher's daughter. Anne smiled, feeling a lump in her throat. She wanted to run away from these people, but she composed herself and calmly replied, "I'm just leaving. I am still in my own home, darling, and by the way, I am still your lover's lawful wife. As for what you are doing here, that is a good question. No shame, no conscience. Where do you all come from? Disgusting people, Anne said, turning to her husband. I think I said your mistress shouldn't be here before I left. She is not a mistress but the mother of my son. Stop the hysterics, it will lead us nowhere good. We are modern people, Christopher said in a raised voice. Very modern indeed, Anne laughed. Christopher, you have never understood people, and you are very wrong now. Look at her, there's a scrolling line on her forehead. I'm looking for a rich daddy. Christopher frowned but remained silent. Ellen rolled her eyes theatrically, lightly touching her still very flat stomach. Anne couldn't help but laugh. Girl, what is your name? Anne asked. Dear Christopher, this girl is a natural actress. I am certain that the surprises in your life are just beginning. The sound of an incoming SMS on her phone made Anne breathe a sigh of relief. The taxi had arrived at the gates of the house. Taking 2 large suitcases, she rolled them towards the exit. Christopher watched his wife leave with sadness in his heart. Something was bothering him, something unpleasant in his soul. At some point, he even wanted to stop this madness, but Ellen quickly resumed playing her role, sensing something was wrong, and tried to shift Christopher's attention to herself. Christopher, my dear, something hurts badly in my lower abdomen, Ellen complained. Christopher quickly came to his senses. My dear, you should not worry. Rest and stay in peace and quiet, as the doctor said, remember, he said, holding Ellen's waist and gently sitting her down. Anne left the walls of her once beloved home, holding on to her dignity until the end. It was unbearable for her to see the woman who destroyed their family being treated with such tenderness and care by her husband. And what awaited Anne ahead? She was even afraid to imagine. In the taxi, she let her tears flow. The driver sympathetically looked at her in the rearview mirror and eventually asked, Are you okay? May I help you with something? I'm sorry, I just couldn't hold back my emotions anymore. It's just that my husband brought his pregnant mistress into our home, that's all, Anne replied with sadness, tears streaming down her face. You know, I'm not certain that such a beautiful woman can be replaced. What a fool your husband is, replied the driver. Well, where is that beauty? I'm already 40. He found himself a young girl, Anne responded. Dear woman, you're only 40. It's the perfect time to love, live and thrive. As for the young people, they've got nothing but wind in their heads. What's the use of their youth? I'm 67. Trust me, as an experienced man, everything will be fine for you. And when that happens, your husband will come back. But will you need him then? It may seem like the end of the world now, but believe me, you will soon remember this situation with complete indifference. You may even laugh about it later. Anne was truly grateful to this wonderful stranger for his support and kind words. She listened to him, and in her heart, hope for a happy future began to grow. In her first month in her new place, Anne was arranging her life. The apartment in the new building was spacious and comfortable, but it couldn't compare to the cozy home where she had spent many years. Perhaps she would have gone crazy from loneliness and sad memories if it weren't for her childhood friends, Gwen and Wes, who supported her as best they could. Wes took Anne on at his company without hesitation. Little by little, Anne settled into her new work environment, where she was greeted warmly by the team. When she received her first paycheck in many years, her happiness and joy knew no bounds. Gwen was a frequent visitor to her friend's home, bringing cheer and support. Wes, on his own initiative, stopped communicating with Christopher. He only called him once when he found out what had happened, and of course, did not support his friend's betrayal. One night, Anne stayed late at work. There was an urgent project that they couldn't seem to finish on time for the client. Wes was desperate, sure that his company would fail the project and lose the client to a competitor. But Anne, remembering everything she had been taught at university, worked tirelessly to fix the situation. Leaving the finished project on Wes's desk, she finally left the office. It was damp and cold outside, and the piercing wind blew right through her coat, making her shiver. Oh, my bad. I should have caught a taxi in advance, she scolded herself aloud, looking around. She saw the headlights of a parked car on the other side of the street. The road was empty, so she decided to take a shortcut and resolutely moved forward to cross the 4 lanes. As soon as Anne stepped onto the road, a car suddenly appeared around the corner. its headlights blinding her. She heard the squeal of brakes and stumbled out of fright. "Are you crazy? Tired of living?" She heard a man's voice as he got out of the car. "You're the one who's crazy. Watch where you're driving," snapped Anne, fully aware she was in the wrong. "Oh, an old acquaintance. Hello, the same people are always on the road," the mocking male voice said. Though familiar, the headlights still blinded her, and she couldn't see the driver's face. "Let me give you a hand. I'll help you up." "Thanks, I've already been helped," Anne replied, her knees and hands bruised. "Tomorrow is an important day for me. I have to present the project to the client, and you've ruined everything for me." "What will the client think of me?" she said reproachfully. "You should tell them the truth, that you're a frivolous person who throws herself under car wheels," the driver retorted. "You're a bore. But you're right, that's the type of person I am. Either way, get in the car. I'll take you home or leave the road. I'm in a hurry." Okay. I don't want to go in this state. Take me home. It's your responsibility since you practically hit me with your car." Anne quickly got up from the wet asphalt and plopped down on the passenger seat. When the driver turned to her, she exclaimed in surprise, "Matthew. If I remember your name correctly." "Yes, that's me. I recognized you right away. You're Anne." The man and the woman laughed, marveling at the coincidence that she had almost been hit by the same car as a few months ago. "Well, I remember where to take you," the man said with a smile, but Anne smiled sadly in response. "A lot has changed in my life. I have a different address now. It's in the new apartment buildings near the South Bridge." "Yes, I know the area, so it turns out we're neighbors now," the man said, smiling. "Excuse my curiosity, but why did you move from a house to an apartment?" "My daughter and I dream of moving into a house. The air is cleaner, everything is different. I divorced my husband. He bought me this apartment, so I moved," Anne replied. "I'm sorry. I remember you had a happy family not long ago." "That's all over now. I couldn't have children with my husband, but his mistress got pregnant. Now they live in my house, enjoying life, and I'm in the apartment." "That's it. I've satisfied your curiosity. Let's be quiet now. I have an important day at work tomorrow." "I'm sorry, Anne. I didn't realize it was like this." Matthew remained silent for the rest of the ride. When they arrived, the man smiled. "We're neighbors. I live across the street. I hope this isn't the last time we meet, but under different circumstances." "Thank you for the ride," Anne said, smiling. She only fell asleep towards morning, thinking about the project and about Matthew. The man was handsome, and being with him felt simple and easy. She found herself hoping to meet him again under more pleasant circumstances. In the morning, barely opening her eyes, Anne looked at the clock and was horrified. "I overslept. Oh, not today," she exclaimed. She rushed around her apartment, getting ready as quickly as possible. Within 10 minutes, she was fully dressed, had touched up her lashes, applied blush, and tied her long hair in a tight bun. She cursed herself for not calling a taxi in advance, and now had to waste precious time waiting for a car. "Good morning, neighbor," Anne heard a familiar voice behind her. Turning around, she breathed a sigh of relief. It was Matthew. "Help me, I'm late for an important meeting," she pleaded, running towards the car where her recent acquaintance was waiting. "I was working late last night on a project. It's critical for my future and the company's reputation. The boss says the client is very picky, and only I know the nuances of the project's execution. Therefore, only I can convince the customer that our project is the right fit for him. How can I refuse a beautiful woman? By the way, I'm also in a hurry for an important meeting. It's not far from here, where you almost got hit yesterday, remember?" Anne pleaded with the man, and he noted her natural beauty with minimal makeup. "I agree, but I have a condition. We'll have lunch together sometime." "Matthew, anything you want. Let's go." As they drove up to the office, Anne jumped out of the car and hurried into the building. Matthew looked at her with a smile, thinking, what kind of man, of his own free will, would let such a woman out of his life? After parking the car, Matthew headed towards the same office building. Meanwhile, Anne, panting, literally flew into the office. "Phew, I got here in time. Wes, have you looked at the project? I did everything. I did what I could and even more, Anne replied, grabbing a pencil from the desk. Here's how I solved the flooding problem for the planned construction by the river. Anne sketched out her solution on the unfolded sheet of paper with drawings. For a few seconds, Wes was stunned with admiration. Anne, you're a miracle. You did in one evening what my best specialists couldn't figure out, Wes exclaimed. My dear Anne, the client will be here any minute, and all my hope is on you. Will you present your project? Of course, Wes. Don't worry, I'll handle everything at the highest level, Anne said, apologizing for being late. Hearing a familiar voice, Anne turned and could barely stand on her feet. Matthew, what are you doing here? She asked. What a pleasant surprise, Anne. I suppose I'm the picky client who made you work late last night, Matthew smiled. Wes, initially tense, relaxed seeing the friendly atmosphere. Good day, Mr. Foy. It turns out you and Anne are acquainted, Wes said, extending his hand in greeting. Good day, yes. Anne and I are friends and neighbors. I'm sure I'll like everything in the project. Let's move on to the presentation, Matthew replied. The negotiations proceeded pleasantly, and Matthew was impressed by Anne's professionalism. To be honest, I approached another company with a similar request, but their project was a failure. They couldn't address the seasonal flooding issues, but you succeeded, Matthew said. It's not just my work. Our whole team contributed to the project, Anne replied, a bit embarrassed. I like everything, Anne. I'd like to invite you to our site where the house will be located. I'd also like to discuss some details. Will tomorrow work for you? Matthew asked. Anne blushed and looked at Wes. Well, Anne, you have an excellent understanding with the client, so congratulations. You will lead this project to the end, Wes smiled. All day, Anne was in a cheerful mood. Everything in her life was gradually improving, and she hardly thought about her ex-husband who had betrayed her. The way Anne looked at Matthew couldn't be hidden from Wes, her childhood friend. Matthew himself didn't hide his sympathy for Anne, and Wes, sincerely wishing her happiness, entrusted her with this project, understanding how important it was for her now. At the end of the workday, Anne left the office. Looking around, she felt like Matthew was nearby. And what are you looking for? Are you 20 years old? She asked herself aloud and prudently went to the crosswalk. In the morning, as agreed, Anne waited for Matthew at the entrance. Anne hated unpunctuality, so when she spotted Matthew in the distance, she became indignant. Hello, Matthew. I've been waiting for you in the rain for half an hour. Hello, sorry for God's sake, but my daughter got sick. Her temperature rose at night, and I didn't have your number to warn you. Our trip is cancelled, Matthew explained. Oh, I'm sorry, Matthew. Is there anything I can do to help? Anne asked guiltily. You know, I really need your help. I don't want to leave Eva alone. I need to go to the pharmacy, Matthew said. Let's do it this way. You go home, and I'll go to the pharmacy. Write down my number. If you need anything else, call me anytime. I'll always help. Now tell me your apartment number, and I'll quickly buy everything and bring it over, Anne offered. You're really helping me out, Matthew said gratefully. 15 minutes later, Anne returned from the supermarket with a bag containing fruits and medicine bought from the list. Take off your coat and come in, please. Eva fell asleep. I made tea. You're all wet, and I wouldn't want you to get sick because of me, Matthew said tenderly, helping Anne take off her coat and inviting her to the kitchen. To Anne's surprise, the atmosphere in Matthew's apartment was quite modest. She knew the budget for Matthew's project was substantial, yet the simplicity of his home suggested he wasn't wealthy. Over tea, Matthew and Anne talked a lot, including about his little daughter Eva. Eva, who was only 5 years old, had been born healthy, but a month later, doctors diagnosed her with a congenital heart defect. When she turned 1, doctors performed a successful operation, and Eva quickly recovered. However, a year after the operation, Eva had her first asthma attack. Matthew did everything he could for his daughter, but no one could cure her completely. The only thing doctors recommended was to take the child out of the city more often and change her environment. Fresh, clean air will certainly be good for her, and maybe the disease will go away altogether. She will grow up and be completely healthy, the doctors had said. That's why I thought building a house now is the way to go. The only problem was that the house would be practically by the river, and you were the only one who could solve that problem, Matthew explained. Matthew, please excuse my curiosity, but what do you do? Where do you work? It must be difficult to raise a daughter alone. You're both a mom and a dad to the little girl, Anne asked. Well, of course, it's very difficult sometimes, especially when my daughter is sick. I'm terribly worried. When Eva is healthy, I take her to daycare and go to work myself. I'm a mechanic at a technical service station, Matthew replied. How do you manage to do everything? Anne asked, amazed. I'm used to it. I can't afford not to manage everything myself because there's no one else to take care of Eva. We try to do everything together. Now we're eagerly waiting for the construction of our dream home to begin. When we finish, I hope everything will get easier. My childhood friend built a sawmill in the village not far from my plot. He says he really needs me as a good woodsman, Matthew said. Wow, do you understand that kind of work? Anne was surprised. Of course. My father did it all his life. We had a profitable wood processing business. By the way, I've been in this area since I was a child. But when my mother died, my father eventually met another woman and sold everything. I didn't even think about doing this business, Matthew explained. Anne listened to Matthew with admiration. She had never met such simple and sincere people in her life, except for Gwen and Wes, of course. Matthew shared a lot about his plans for the future, and Anne liked everything about him, his sense of humor, simplicity, way of communicating, care, and attention. She especially liked his sincere eyes and smile. Matthew and Anne were so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't notice Eva entering the kitchen. Daddy, who is this lady? Eva asked. Eva, darling, how are you feeling? Matthew smiled, turning to his daughter. Come here, I'll introduce you to my friend. This is Anne. She lives next door to us and came to help us as soon as she found out that you were sick. Hello, Anne, I'm Eva, the little girl greeted warmly. Very pleased to meet you, Eva. You're a very cute and beautiful girl, Anne said, looking at her new acquaintance with curiosity. You're also very beautiful. Do you have a daughter? The little girl asked. Unfortunately, no. I would really like to have a smart daughter like you, Anne replied sincerely. Well, if Eva agrees, I suggest we order pizza and watch an interesting movie. We have an unplanned day off tomorrow anyway, Matthew suggested. Eva clapped her hands with joy and hugged everyone. Hooray! Will Anne also be with us? Matthew looked imploringly at Anne. Well, if you accept me into your team, I would be happy to join you, Anne said, stroking the little girl's unruly curls. Eva leaned against Anne, putting her head on her shoulder. Anne was touched by the child's sincerity, warmth, and openness. From that day on, a true friendship blossomed between Anne, Matthew, and Eva. Eva was pleased that Anne had become a frequent guest in their home. The friendly company spent time together perfectly, playing board games, watching educational films about animals, and often going to amusement parks and zoos. After spending months together, Anne could no longer imagine her life without Matthew and Eva, just as Matthew and his daughter couldn't imagine their lives without Anne. The house construction was progressing rapidly. Wes entrusted Anne with another complex project, which she handled brilliantly. The employees now consulted Anne on difficult matters, and she never refused to help them. One day, when Wes came to the office, Anne noticed that he was acting differently than usual. She decided to find out from her friend what was troubling him. Anne knocked on the boss's office door with a cup of coffee in her hand. Hello, Anne. Come in. Of course, you're always welcome, Wes smiled. Did something happen? You seem upset, Anne asked. Yes, and you're right. Something happened. Remember Christopher gave me some money? Well, he's having some problems with his business and other things. Alan seems to have given birth to a son, and he demanded the money back sooner than expected. And that's not all, Anne. He asked me to tell you that the apartment you live in, well, in 2 words, he has his own family now and won't pay the loan for it anymore. Yeah, that's to be expected. It was a surprise to me that the property was bought on credit, but Christopher promised to pay for it regularly. Once again, I believed him, and he cheated again, Anne sighed. I'll pay back my debt within a week. I don't understand how he could do this to you. We've been together for so long. You sold your apartment and invested every penny in the house where he now lives with another woman. I really wanted to hit him hard, but this coward refused to even meet with me. He said I should put the money in his account, and since I supported you, he said we have nothing more to talk about. Where's our manager? The apartment is in my name, I earn good money, and I have a wonderful boss, so I'll pay off the loan myself. Now I've learned a lesson for life. I was foolish, young, and didn't think it would all end like this. But he has a son now, you know. Christopher always wanted children, and of course he should think about his future now, and sadly smiled. Oh, come on, do you still feel pity for him after all he's done? Wes asked incredulously. But anyway, you're not alone. Gwen and I will help you. Our company's reputation has grown thanks to your efforts. That's why I decided to give you a well-deserved raise. Thank you, dear. Can I leave early today? Everything is done at work. I want to stop by the store on the way home. Today is my birthday. We've already picked out a gift with Matthew. We just need to pick it up. Wow, you've picked the gift out with Matthew. Wes smiled. Is everything serious? Oh, I don't know. Maybe I should trust fate. If it gives me a second chance, Matthew is a very good person, and Eva is such a cute girl. They've brought me back to life, Anne said, her eyes glowing. Your eyes are glowing, Anne. Don't miss the chance for happiness. You're right, trust fate, Wes encouraged. Thank you. I'm overjoyed that you and Gwen are there for me. Otherwise, I would have gone crazy from loneliness. A year passed. Well, guys, you did an impressive job. Your house is just amazing, and you calculated everything perfectly with the river. Now no flood can harm it. Wes admired the view from the house's terrace overlooking the river. Probably when the time comes, Anne rubbed her rounding belly and looked at Matthew with eyes full of happiness. Matthew hugged his wife and gently kissed her cheek. We have a little more to do. The workers are finishing the work inside the house. Besides, Anne and I have decided to live in the city until the baby is born, and then we'll think about moving. Great job, guys. I'm thrilled for your new family, Wes said. Oh, Wes, I never thought a person could be so happy, Matthew said warmly. You're a bright example, dear Matthew. Don't hesitate to ask for help. Anne's family is my family. That's our rule. Thank you, Wes. Your help will really be needed. I've decided to get into woodworking. I feel right at home in this business, so soon I'll be setting up production locally, Matthew announced proudly. Wonderful, but I won't let Anne go, don't even dream about it, Wes chuckled. I won't leave you either. You and Gwen have helped me so much. I value our friendship and enjoy my work. Besides, a bit more money won't hurt us right now. All right, enough about business. Let's go see Gwen and the kids. They're probably missing us, Matthew suggested. When they returned home, they found the children playing with a ball while Gwen set the table, having prepared a treat in advance. By this time, Anne's life was gradually improving. The apartment issue had been resolved thanks to a lawyer hired by Wes. Her work paid well, allowing her to diligently pay off the mortgage on the property. 6 months after meeting Matthew, they got married. Eva was thrilled to have a mom, and they all developed warm, trusting friendships. Matthew adored his wife and appreciated her role in raising Eva. Anne was excited about their growing family, eagerly shopping with Matthew for baby items. One day, while Matthew was out of town, Anne went for a scheduled appointment at the women's consultation. Gwen kindly agreed to stay with Eva, knowing her son Tommy was eager to play with his new friend again. Leaving the doctor's office in a good mood, Anne decided to stop by the mall to look for toys for Eva and Tommy. However, an unpleasant surprise awaited her at the shopping center. She came face to face with her ex-husband Christopher, who froze upon seeing her pregnancy. Anne, how? Christopher began, his surprise evident. Hello, Christopher. It's none of your business. I heard your son was born. Congratulations, Anne replied calmly, her tone cool. I'd say it's good to see you, but it's not. I need to go. goodbye, Christopher, she added, walking away without looking back. Christopher stood still for a moment, watching Anne leave. When he returned home, his young son ran to greet him, but Ellen remained seated on the couch, absorbed in her phone. "Hi, Ellen. Are we going to have dinner?" Christopher asked from the doorway. Ellen glanced up, her expression showing clear disapproval. "I asked you to transfer money to my card. Did you forget?" Ellen asked, ignoring Christopher's question. "Ellen, is that all you want to say to me? You've been acting strange lately. Is everything okay with you?" Christopher inquired, concerned. "I'm not being strange, Christopher. I just don't like it when you ignore my requests," Ellen replied sharply. "This is not a request. It sounds more like a demand. I'm having difficulties at work, and we need to be smart with our money, not like you're used to. You've been married once to someone who handled money wisely. How did it end? I need to update my wardrobe. I don't want to look like a slob like her," Ellen retorted. "Shut up, Ellen, and don't you dare talk about Anne. You're not worth her little finger. If it weren't for our son." Christopher's voice trailed off as he headed to the playroom with their baby. Realizing she had gone too far, Ellen went to the kitchen to prepare something for her husband's dinner. Christopher tried to calm down, focusing on his son, but what the 2-year-old had said left doubts in his mind. That night, Christopher put off the unpleasant conversation with his wife, but asked vaguely about their day. Ellen responded evasively that they had stayed home all day. At night, Christopher couldn't get Anne out of his head. He noted to himself how good she still looked and how pregnancy suited her. The thought that his ex-wife was happy with someone else drove him crazy. A sudden wave of unfounded jealousy overwhelmed him again and again. The next day, Christopher went to work as usual. Unexpectedly, as he left the house, he said to Ellen, "I sent you the money you asked for on your card. So, update your wardrobe." Upon hearing this, Ellen smiled and literally jumped on her husband, wrapping her arms around his neck. "My dear, thank you. I love you, my love. See you tonight," she exclaimed. Christopher gently pushed his wife aside and left the house until evening. Instead of going to work that day, he decided to follow Ellen to see if she really would go shopping with their son. Soon, he was deeply disappointed because he caught his spouse in the act of deception. As soon as Ellen left the house with their son, Christopher set off after her, driving cautiously to avoid being noticed. His suspicions were confirmed when Ellen parked the car in a residential area and entered a 10-story building with their son in her arms. Christopher patiently waited for her to come back out, which didn't happen until closer to evening. Ellen emerged from the building accompanied by a young man carrying Christopher's son on his shoulders. Christopher barely contained his anger, but didn't reveal himself. He wanted to get to the truth and began to have doubts in his head. Meanwhile, Matthew and Anne finished building their dream home and planned to spend the weekend there with their friends Wes and Gwen. "Matthew, I'm going to my apartment for a minute. I need to water the flowers. We won't be here for a few days," Anne informed him. "Can you handle it yourself? Maybe take Eva with you," Matthew suggested. "Yes, my love. Of course, with Eva, we'll do it faster," Anne replied. Eva did her best, deftly watering the flowers and entertaining Anne by humming a tune. Suddenly, a knock on the door interrupted them. "It's probably Daddy. Please open the door, dear," Anne said to Eva, turning to the little girl. "Okay, Mama," Eva replied. "I'll be right there." Running to the door, Eva asked, "Who's there?" Hearing a stranger's voice behind the door, she immediately called for Anne. When Anne looked through the peephole, she was surprised to see an uninvited guest. "Christopher, what are you doing here?" Anne asked cautiously, opening the door. "We need to talk. I'm a fool. Forgive me. I apologize for what I've done to you. Let's start over, please." Anne looked at Eva and smiled warmly at her. "Eva, go check if we watered all the flowers together. I need to talk to this person for a few minutes." The little girl obediently nodded her head and disappeared behind the door of the room. "Christopher, are you out of your mind? I have a different life now. I'm expecting a child with my beloved. Once upon a time, you said you were finally happy and about to have a son. Remember?" "Well, now I understand what you meant," Anne replied firmly. Anne, I'm finally happy. I have a daughter, and another child is on the way. I don't love you. I let you go a long time ago, Christopher pleaded. No, you can't. I was a fool. I'm divorcing Alan. She lied to me from the very beginning. She was with me for the money. My son, he isn't mine. It's all a long story. I did a DNA test. Ellen gave birth to a son by another man, and the worst part is, all this time, while I wasn't home, she was spending time with the boy's biological father. Ellen provided for her lover at my expense, and now I'm all alone. Forgive me and come back to our home. Remember how happy we were together there? I will love your child as my own. I will be lost without you. Christopher looked hopefully at his ex-wife. Now you understand how I felt when you betrayed me. Only Christopher, let's be honest. I was a faithful wife. I never betrayed you. You destroyed everything yourself. So it turns out that the fact we didn't have children is not my fault at all. Anne countered. Christopher, you got what you deserved, but it came back to you like a boomerang. Leave and never dare to come here again. I will never come back to you, Anne stated firmly. Christopher was in despair. The apartment door opened, and Matthew appeared on the doorstep. He had unintentionally overheard the conversation between his wife and her ex-husband. Dear, you and Eva were gone for a long time. I decided to check if everything was okay, he said calmly. Wes and Gwen have already arrived, and Tony couldn't wait for Eva. Having said this, Matthew looked sternly at the uninvited guest. And what are you doing here? Actually, I bought this apartment. I have the right, Christopher replied. What a wretch you are. This apartment belongs to my wife and only to her. Have you forgotten what it means to be a man? What other rights do you dare to claim here? Matthew interrupted sharply. Christopher, it's better to leave. It's all over, Anne said firmly. There was nothing more to say. Christopher couldn't hold back a tear rolling down his cheek. He sincerely regretted his actions, realizing that he had lost his happiness and had destroyed everything himself. Turning around, he slowly headed for the exit. At the doorstep, he turned back and unexpectedly said, Forgive me, Anne. And you, he turned to Matthew, take care of her. There is no one like Anne in the whole wide world. Don't worry, I won't miss my chance at happiness. Matthew replied coldly, closing the door behind the guest, Christopher. Anne closed her eyes with relief in the arms of her beloved. Eva, it's time for us, she called the little girl, and the three of them went to their home. When the happy family cheerfully left the entrance of the building, they had no idea that a lonely man in a car opposite was watching them, gripping the steering wheel tightly. It was Christopher. He just sat and watched Anne and her family disappear, knowing that he would never have her again. 3 years passed, and a company of happy people came to spend time in pleasant company on the bank of the river, in a cozy paradise corner. Matthew and Wes were busy at the barbecue while Tommy helped Eva teach her younger brother how to ride a 3-wheeled bike. Anne and Gwen watched their loved ones lying on soft lounges by the riverbank. I look at my family and can't believe how happy I am, Gwen. It's scary to even imagine how I would live without them, Anne remarked. Oh, and I don't think it could have been any other way. You deserve your happiness. Don't be offended, but I even envy you in a good way. Every day spent together is like a honeymoon, Gwen replied warmly. You're right, Gwen. Matthew is a great man. He has his production set up, and work is booming. By the way, I'm almost finished with the project of our dream house, so we'll live nearby and see each other more frequently, Anne said joyfully. Girls, the meat is ready. Let's eat while it's hot. Matthew called out. Wes watched the approaching beautiful and cheerful women and couldn't hide his excitement. Matthew, we're lucky to have them, he commented with a smile. Matthew turned around and smiled, seeing Anne and Gwen in front of him. He thanked fate for everything that happened in his life, both the bad and the good. Now he knew what a real family, joy, and love were. The life of a deceived woman abandoned in a moment changed fundamentally, precisely when she least expected it. Nothing happens for no reason. Every meeting is for something. It's important to recognize the signs of fate correctly so as not to miss happiness passing you by. Every day, looking at how her beloved husband Matthew played with the children and how happily they laughed, Anne thanked God for the chance of a happy and carefree future. She loved and was loved and now knew for sure that life could be started even at 40,